Hey everyone, today we are going to be talking about the big topic of abortion, and I am joined here in Austin by the wonderful Thomas Westbrook, also known as Holy Koolaid. Before you watch this video, make sure you go check out the first part over on his channel. Mm-hmm. I think it's going to be good.
I hope so.
Yeah.
But I'm a little bit biased.
Maybe a little bit. Also, just check out Thomas's channel. You make some pretty amazing content about atheism and debunking psychics and lots of kind of pseudoscience stuff. And he's just a pretty good guy, aren't you?
Oh, thanks.
So I'm back in London now filming this part. First up, I want to say a huge thank you to Thomas for tackling this huge, complicated, but very important topic with me. If you haven't checked out his channel and subscribed yet, go on over and do that because he is absolutely wonderful and smart and you will love his videos. First up in today's video, we are going to be talking about pregnancy and abortion and some of the facts about it, defining a few terms, maybe dispelling a few of the myths and things that you might have heard, and just covering a few of the important little bits. And then afterwards, Thomas is going to go over the idea of kind of personhood and what it means to be a person, an individual, a sentient being. When does a bundle of cells become an actual human? When does it become a life in its own right? When do the rights of that bundle of cells become equal to that of the mother that's hosting it? All complicated stuff, but very important to talk about. There's going to be a lot of pretty heavy, dense information in this first part of the video. Some of the kind of conclusions, some of the places where we draw certain lines is still hotly debated. So I'm going to be giving you the best information that I can, but if you want to read more about this stuff, I'm going to leave loads and loads of sources down in the description below. There's a huge range of stuff down there. Some of them are nice, simple, easy to read. Blog posts or articles or news stories. Some of them are a little more heavy, some of them are a few kind of like journal articles and kind of big complex sciencey stuff, but hopefully there'll be something for everyone down there, so if you want to find out more about this topic, you can do. When we talk about pregnancy, the times and dates that we use can be a little bit confusing. For example, the average pregnancy lasts 40 weeks, however the fetal growing time is only 38 weeks. I'll try and explain. When we talk about the first week of pregnancy, the woman isn't actually pregnant. It's the start of her last period before she becomes pregnant. So the first week is basically her period. The second week is when she ovulates. She releases an egg, and if she has sex during that time, there's a chance that that egg will be fertilized, and this newly fertilized egg is called a zygote. Over the next 5 to 6 days, so during the third week of pregnancy, a little bit into the fourth week potentially, there's a chance for implantation. That fertilized egg has a chance of attaching to the uterus lining, and if it does, it becomes what's known as a blastocyst, and it starts to grow. It's actually estimated that only around 40% of fertilized eggs ever actually implant in the uterine lining. So for the people who believe that life begins at fertilization, that's a hell of a lot of babies dying right there, and a lot of deaths that go unnoticed and unmourned. So you'd assume that, there'd be a lot more focus on trying to prevent that, wouldn't you? Week 4 of pregnancy is when things really kick in. The cells of the blastocyst start to divide and we start referring to it as an embryo. At this point, there's no umbilical cord or anything. It's just kind of attached to the uterus lining. It's relying on a yolk sac for nutrition and nourishment. It looks a little bit like this. At week 5, the embryo is only 2 millimeters long. It's absolutely tiny. And at this point, the pregnant woman may have only just missed her period, but chances are she won't even know she's pregnant yet. You might have heard people say that this is the point where the nervous system develops. Yes and no. We're starting to see the foundation of the nervous system develop, but it's nowhere near what we think of as a nervous system in a fully grown adult or even a newborn baby. It's nowhere near that stage. Basically, a neural plate forms, which then curves into what's known as a neural tube. It's just a very, very small, tiny little patch of neurons, which are nerve cells, essentially. It's very important because this is the bundle of cells which will go on to divide and specialize and grow, and eventually it will become the spinal cord in the brain. However, in its current state, it's not really doing a lot. It's the ingredients for the nervous system. It's kind of like having a single wire out of an entire computer system. It's a very, very important bundle of cells, and if you want to continue the pregnancy, it's very important that you kind of look after yourself at this stage, because any defects that happen to the neural tube at this point can lead to birth defects later on. For example, spina bifida as an example. However, while it's an important starting point for more advanced kind of organs and features later in the pregnancy. In its current state, it doesn't really do much. It doesn't function as the kind of nervous system that we know and understand. By week 6, again, there's a chance that most women don't even know they're pregnant at this point. Unless they're actively trying to get pregnant, they might not even be looking for the signs. You know, if you have an irregular period with differing cycle lengths, it might be normal for you to not have your period yet, so you don't think anything of it. Unless you're monitoring your ovulation and kind of counting your period days very, very carefully, unless you're regularly taking tests, you probably won't even think to be like, well, am I pregnant? There's no outward signs like nausea or fatigue, anything like that. It's all happening internally and there's no clue that it's happening. So it's very uncommon for women who accidentally get pregnant to know that it's happening at this stage. At this point, the entire embryo is no more than about 4 or 5 millimeters long, maybe 6 in some cases. A lot of the new legislation in America in particular talks about how at this stage there's a heartbeat, but that's kind of oversimplifying things a lot. What actually forms at this stage is like a small bundle of cells with a tiny electrical pulse that is only detectable by highly sensitive equipment. It's not a heartbeat as we know a heartbeat to be. Again, it's an important bundle of cells if you want to continue the pregnancy, because later on it will form a heart. And the thing is, the heart is the first organ to become functional in an embryo, so I can understand why some people look at it, but it's still a long way off at this stage from being the kind of organ we think of when we picture a heart. It's still a long way off from having its chambers and its muscle and actually working to pump the heart, essentially. There's just an electrical signal in some cells which have blood flowing through them. To skip forward a little bit, from 11 weeks onward, the fetus becomes known as an embryo because it's kind of developed a bit more. To talk about a few other stages of the pregnancy that I think are worth noting, I want to talk about a few areas of brain development. Now, this is complicated, this is highly contested, there's lots of differing opinions here, but I think it's one of the most important areas to focus on, because for me, this is what does play a part in whether something is a sentient being or not, whether it's an individual or not, whether it's a human or not. First up, I want to talk about the ability to feel pain, and not only feel pain, but be aware of pain. So I'm talking about understanding pain on a conscious level. There's a hell of a lot of debate around this topic. One of the big people who speaks about it is Dr. Anand, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who is a professor of pediatrics, anesthesiology and neurobiology at the University of Tennessee's Health Science Center. He says that he does consider fetal pain to be likely between 20 and 24 weeks of the pregnancy, because at this stage, pain receptors have formed and there's enough of a cerebral cortex that's formed to be able to actually process the information from these pain receptors. He talks about studies that have shown that there's electrical activity in this part of the cerebral cortex at this stage, although whether this activity actually means there's a consciousness or not is disputable. Some people disagree with his ideas to say that fetuses can feel pain at 20 weeks, but kind of so we don't risk it, a lot of legislation has been put in place, especially in certain states in America, that state if you have an abortion at 20 weeks or after, the fetus has to be given anesthetic before the abortion is carried out, just in case it can feel pain. So there are steps taken to reduce its suffering at this point. However, other sources claim that it's very, very unlikely a fetus can even start to understand or feel pain before the start of the 3rd trimester. Certain scientists, like Dr. Rosen, argue that in order to feel the sensation of pain and kind of be aware of it and understand it and respond to it, certain neural connections in the cortex have to be not only in place, but functioning to a certain level. He says that while these might start developing as early as 23 weeks into the pregnancy, they're not actually functional until 26 or 27 weeks, and therefore it's unlikely that a fetus could even begin to feel pain before that point. To quote one paper on this matter, because, it explains it way better than I ever could. Pain perception requires conscious recognition of awareness of a noxious stimulus. Neither withdrawal reflexes nor hormonal stress responses to invasive procedures prove the existence of fetal pain, because they can be elicited by non-painful stimuli and occur without conscious cortical processing. Fetal awareness of noxious stimuli requires functional thalamocortical connections. thalamocortical fibers begin appearing between 23 and 30 weeks gestational age, while electroencephalography, that's hard to say, suggests the capacity for functional pain perception in preterm neonates probably does not exist before 29 or 30 weeks. A number of others have agreed with his view, however it's still hotly debated, and I would probably err on the side of caution and say even if there's a chance they can feel pain earlier, definitely provide anesthetic just in case. This issue is linked closely with the concept of consciousness as a whole. When does a fetus or an embryo become conscious? When is the brain developed enough to process information on a conscious level? When does it become a sentient being? I'd argue that once it does reach this stage of having conscious thought, of being sentient, then it has rights equal to that of the mother that's hosting it, but not before. So again, there's a lot of debate around this, a lot of contradicting sources. We don't have an exact time or date frame, and even if we did, it would kind of only be an average because every fetus, every embryo, every baby develops at a slightly different rate. So we could say, okay, X weeks, but for one baby it might be a couple of days earlier, for another it might be a week later. A lot of sources suggest that the cerebral cortex, which is responsible for conscious thought and making memories and processing voluntary actions and so on, a lot of sources suggest that this starts developing around the 3rd month, but that's start to develop. That doesn't mean those functions are, functioning at that stage. An odd little quote I found from one article reads as follows. This is about a fetus at 13 weeks. Yet the fetus is not a sentient, self-aware organism at this point. It's more like a sea slug, a writhing reflex-bound hunk of sensory motor processes that does not respond to anything in a directed, purposeful way. Laying down the infrastructure for a mature brain and processing a mature brain are two very different states of being. While it might not be nice to compare a fetus or an embryo to a sea slug, it's kind of accurate to compare their nervous systems at that point. Regardless of when exactly it happens, what we do know is that the cerebral cortex is the last part of the fetus's brain to properly develop to the point of functioning, and many argue that this doesn't happen until around 23 or 24 weeks, potentially later. At this stage, we do start to see synaptic growth and activity, and we see actual electrical activity in the cerebral cortex, which suggests it is functioning to some level. It's of course a lot more complicated than this, there's no definite answer, but it's just another thing worth considering. Another big misconception I want to tackle about abortion is when the most abortions take place. The majority of abortions do happen very early in the stages of pregnancy, before there's even a chance of a consciousness developing, before there's even a chance of the fetus being able to feel pain. 98.5% of abortions in the US occur before 21 weeks. And the ones that take place after this are primarily to either save the mother's life or if the baby has developed a life-threatening health condition. In England and Wales, the stats are very, very similar. The most recent ones I could find report just under 186,000 abortions being carried out in 1 year. Only 230 of those were after 24 weeks. And again, they were if the mother's life was at risk or if the fetus had developed a health condition that would have put it at risk or put the mother at risk or would have ruined its quality of life or whatever. So that's less than 0.1% of all abortions in the UK being carried out after that point. And again, they were for medical reasons. They were purely a last resort. To look at the England and Wales stats again, 80% of abortions were carried out under 10 weeks and 92% under 13 weeks. So when you see propaganda from pro-lifers like the following images, which I'm going to warn you, they're pretty disturbing, they're not very nice. If you want to skip them, there's a timestamp on screen right now. Skip to this point and you won't have to look at them. But when you see the kind of images like this, the kind of propaganda that they're providing, I want you to know that they're not accurate. This isn't what most abortions look like. They're not removing something that's about this big and looks like an actual baby. They're not chopping it up and pulling it apart like they want you to think. Most abortions, the majority of abortions, unless they're for medical or life-saving reasons, the majority of abortions are removing a tiny bundle of cells around the size of a grain of rice or a pea or a bean, and it looks more like this. And this finally brings me to the topic of what abortion actually is. A lot of pro-lifers spread a lot of harmful rumours, and they try and make out that abortion is a lot worse, a lot more inhumane, honestly just a lot more gruesome than it actually is. Now let's be honest, late-term abortions aren't pleasant, but they are last resort measures when the mother's life is at risk or there are problems with the baby's development. But it's important to remember that the majority of abortions aren't like this. Those few cases are last resort measures to save lives. The big thing to remember is that the earlier you have an abortion, the easier and safer it is. There are two kinds of abortions, medical and surgical. Medical abortions are so quick and simple. The entire process takes about 10 minutes. You don't need to take a lot of time out of your day. It's not a big deal. Medical abortions can be used up to around 10 weeks into the pregnancy, and it simply involves taking 2 pills. Remember, at this stage, the fetus is absolutely tiny, it's barely over an inch long, it's got no consciousness, no way of feeling pain, no advanced nervous system. It's a tiny bundle of cells. So on the first day you go and you take a pill with this name that I'm not even going to try and pronounce. And what this does is it blocks your body from producing a hormone, progesterone, which is what's needed to stimulate the fetus to keep growing. So taking this pill simply stops the pregnancy from progressing. You're not directly hurting that bundle of cells in any way. You're not directly doing anything to target those cells. You're simply stopping your body from producing a hormone that stimulates them to keep dividing. On the second day, you take a second pill, so somewhere between 24 and 48 hours afterwards. And what this does is it stimulates the start of a period in your body. So it causes the uterus lining to break down, it causes your uterus to cramp, and so you bleed. And that just removes the cells which now aren't dividing any longer, just flushes them out of your body essentially like a regular period. It's not a matter of killing a living thing like some people would have you believe. You're simply preventing unconscious cells from dividing anymore. As a process, it's almost comparable to taking antibiotics, to be honest. Your other option is a surgical abortion, and in the UK, for example, you can have a surgical abortion up to 24 weeks into your pregnancy, and it can be used at any stage. Before 15 weeks of pregnancy, simply a small tube is inserted into the uterus via the vagina, which basically just uses a little suction function to remove the embryo from the uterus lining. Simple as that. If a surgical abortion is happening after 15 weeks, then a woman's given anaesthetic, her cervix is dilated, and little forceps are inserted, and the fetus is removed. It takes about 20 minutes, and that's it. It's over. So hopefully this gave you some idea of what an abortion actually is, how an embryo and a fetus in a pregnancy develops. Hopefully it's kind of dispelled some myths for you and cleared up a few things. It's very easy to use emotive language when we talk about pregnancy and abortions. A lot of the websites you look at will be all about women excited to have their baby and wanting to know how it's developing into a person. So they'll use language like, oh, its eyes, its hands, its feet, its fingernails develop at this stage, when really not quite so much. It's more a small bundle of cells that haven't quite specialized yet that are starting to form, that will later become these things. So while it can be very easy to humanize a tiny bundle of cells because of what it will become, you have to think logically and rationally. And for the people who don't want to have a baby, for the people who can't have a baby, for the people who are simply not emotionally or financially or physically well enough to continue a pregnancy, for their sake, you have to remember that rationally at these early stages, these are non-conscious, non-sentient bundles of mostly unspecialized cells. And you kind of have to have a little bit of compassion for the mother at this stage, for the host of this bundle of cells, because she is a living sentient being. And at this stage, the embryo isn't. But before I start rambling and you get bored of me, to talk about this issue further, I'm going to pass you on to Thomas, who is going to talk about this idea of personhood in a little bit more detail.
Thank you, Rachel, for having me on your fantastic channel, and hello to all of Rachel's fans. Now that she's covered the basics of how an abortion works and the development process of an embryo, it's time to ask, when does personhood develop? For almost 2 millennia, dating as far back as Pythagoras and Aristotle, the doctrine of preformation was widely accepted. It was believed that the man's sperm contained a fully formed little human or homunculus that simply needed a warm, nutrient-rich place to grow and develop. Even as late as the 15th century, many alchemists believed that the womb was simply a nutrient-rich substrate, but was only one of the many possible locations for the development of a human. The alchemist Paracelsus literally wrote that if you ejaculated on warm horse poop and periodically fed the glazed turd fresh blood, it would grow into a human. Whether or not he thought women could poop out babies will remain a mystery. But it's important to point out that pre-formationism was the height of medical knowledge at the time that the Bible and the Quran were written. Even after Antony von Leeuwenhoek used a microscope to discover sperm in 1677, he likened them to tadpoles, and many in the scientific community thought they were parasites. It wasn't until 1827 that Carl Ernst von Baer discovered the mammalian egg, and fertilization of mammalian eggs wasn't observed until 1875. Obviously, we now know, thanks to microscopes and modern medical technology, that the sperm is only half a baby recipe, and even when a sperm and an egg are combined, the resulting zygote only contains the ingredients and genetic blueprint for life, and needs to implant in the woman's uterus and receive very specific nutrients over the course of 9 months to eventually develop into a human child. But let's let all of this sink in for a moment. As recently as 150 years ago, there was an active scientific debate about where babies come from. Today, the debate has shifted to what stage in the gradual baby forming process does it go from baby blueprint to human being. According to recent research by geneticist William Richard Rice of UC Santa Barbara, more than half of all successful fertilizations either never successfully implant or are spontaneously miscarried at some stage of the pregnancy. Usually it happens so early on in the pregnancy that the woman doesn't even know she was pregnant. This is extremely common and natural. No one is running around claiming that half of all women's bodies have murdered babies against the woman's will. No one labels an embryo who cannibalizes its twin in the womb as little Jeffrey Dahmer. If we did, then the god theists attribute this poor design process to would be the world's greatest abortionist, and saving the lives of this billions-high baby pile would be humanity's greatest priority, topping out well above cancer research or heart disease prevention. But society doesn't operate that way. We know it's absurd, because for the most part, we all accept that the ingredients for a potential human are not the same as an actual human being. And only the most radical anti-abortion extremists believe that personhood begins at conception, that in vitro fertilization is murder because the unused zygotes are human beings in petri dishes, a notion that harkens back to pre-formationism. Most people don't believe that an egg McSperm combo becomes a human being the second a soul enters the little cell cluster. The existence of a soul is a different debate, which I will address separately in the next few days over on my channel. But to steelman the pro-life position, clearly, there's not much difference between a baby in the womb moments before and moments after delivery. And if we care about the life of babies, shouldn't we do our best to protect them in the womb? Well, no one is in favor of murdering babies, a common anti-abortion strawman. But if an egg and a sperm don't instantly become a miniature human homunculus, but gradually form into a human, the question shouldn't be about whether or not abortion should be legal, but rather we should use science to determine at what point in the process does it become a human being? When does it become viable to survive outside the womb? When can it start experiencing pain? When is it sentient? And weighing all of this into account, at what stage in that developmental process does it become morally questionable to terminate the pregnancy, if at all? And Rachel and I will be covering that over on my channel, Holy Koolaid, as well as the unseen ramifications of outright banning abortion, plus the effective ways of reducing the need for abortion without restricting a woman's right to one. Thanks again for having me on your channel, Rachel. It has been an absolute pleasure, and I will see the rest of you in part 2.
Thank you guys so much for watching today. We really hope you enjoyed this. Let us know what you thought of everything down in the comments, and make sure you check out the other part over on Thomas's channel. And while you're there, make sure you go and like his videos, subscribe to his videos, tell him what a good guy he is. But for now, thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Thank you so much to everyone supporting me on Patreon this month, with a special thank you going to Data Jack, Gambit and Chauffeur, Liv's Pantyhose Addiction, Christian Berg, Jadeon Sheppard, Robert Korte, Peter Kyrouac, Sir Michael Moore, Christina the Atheist, Christian Opitz, Sage Villarreal, Greg Ladd and Loren Hart. You and everyone else supporting me on Patreon is absolutely amazing, and I wouldn't be able to do this without you. Thank you so much.